Hey everyone, my name's Eric. I am going to create a video blog, hopefully every day, to codify and synthesize everything that I'm reading. I have a goal of 100 books a year, so we're going to start with the introduction to Edward Gibbon's The Fall, or The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Gibbon was an English historian, I should know that. English historian, lived in the 18th century, wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire from 1776 to 1789. It's a 6-volume set. The first of 3 deal with the decline of the Roman Empire as most commonly understood, and then the final 3 deal with Byzantium. And so Rome was really just a series of kind of like small villages that was founded in, I think, 573 BC, and then its final demise was in about 456 AD, something around then. So a 1,000-year period. And so the question is, how did it decline? How did it fall? What implications does it have for us today? And Hugh Trevor Roper, is it Trevor Roper, something like that, who wrote the introduction to the book, summarizes it as Rome fundamentally declined because it lost its public spirit, or what Machiavelli calls the virtue. And a lot of this idea is borrowed from the Athenians, from whom the Romans, of course, borrowed heavily. And some of those characteristics include such things as being able to confidently assert your opinion, your words, different actions from the whole. There's a strong individuality and especially a responsibility for civic duties. Every man had his duty and obligation to the government. The quote was, everyone has a responsibility to, quote, assert the liberty of our thoughts, words, and actions, and to cultivate, then quote again, a strong sense of their interests, their own interest in the preservation and prosperity of the free government of which we are members. So you see that there's a lot of individual responsibility. And throughout this whole thing, it just really made me think about, first, how blessed we are to have the government that we have, which is fundamentally a risk mitigator against the possible molestation of rights and the encroachment upon our liberties by government or any other tyrannical powers. Wow. Crap. I was balancing a plate of bacon on a mug, and it fell. So much for that. Cool. Government. No. But as I pick up this bacon, there was because obviously our forefathers wanted to mitigate against, there's the bacon, what's left of it, wanted to mitigate against tyrannical powers like King George of their time. And so they built a government that doesn't assume the best in people, but rather assumes that people are fallen, people are going to mess up, and that's why we have the 3 legislative system, or excuse me, the 3 branches of our government. That's why we have, the term of presidents was actually really a precedent established by George Washington, but now it's codified. This is why you have democracy, is the idea, it's basically subsidiarity, right? You want to give power to the individuals. You want to make it basically as hard as possible to accumulate power and become a tyrant. Now, obviously, you can look to Hitler and the Weimar Republic, and there are ways that these systems can fall apart and that people can still attain tyrannical heights, but you want to make it as hard as possible for these people. And so that's actually fundamentally why Gibbon couldn't or wouldn't really praise Rome, because, you saw that it quickly, that it did devolve from a Roman Republic taking after the Athenians, the Greeks, into then an empire ruled by, at times, despotic emperors, to then, at the end of the day, ultimate demise. It's because you had these vacillations between good and bad rulers, which then manifested in good or bad times for the empire as a whole. What the United States does is it mitigates that. Is that it doesn't matter really who is leading. We could have a totally incompetent horse. Who was the emperor who had who declared their horse a not a prelate? I forget. But you could have someone totally incompetent in charge. Like a lot of people think Trump's incompetent. Well, but if you look at it, like the United States still functions really dang well, even with a purportedly incompetent person at the helm. There's a great quote that goes something like, being president is being captain of a very large ship and having a very small rudder, which is to say that you can't really change that much for good or for ill, as much as presidents disproportionately take credit, I suppose, for the good or for the bad. Like the economy doesn't all of a sudden get 10 times better because one person gets in charge. It's just ignorant of all the millions of preceding data. But yeah, I think that's what I've come away with from the beginning, at least, is such a profound appreciation for our founders' vision, for how prescient they were and how wise they were about the nature of man. They weren't deluding themselves. And so very much extrapolating this idea and applying it to today, I'm increasingly convinced of the principle of subsidiarity, whereby you break the sum into its parts and invest as much power and authority into the parts as you possibly can from the sum. People who want to vest the government with more and more power, because especially in the face of what they see as corporate misgivings or of monopolistic and predatory organizations, companies, things like that, or the rich, they want to instead invest increased power in the government. Governments too can be monopolies. Monopolies are basically anything that has absolute control, which is one of Gibbon's problems with Rome, is that it had such a universality to it that men could hardly be free, that everywhere you went was Rome. One could not breathe in free air in a way. And that's why really like the development of, I suppose you might call it like a fractured Europe, can actually be a really good thing. Is why the involvement of like many states, whether they're nation states or here in the US, actual states, can actually be such a good thing, because it provides a safe harbor, a shelter to those who would flee from tyranny, who would flee from the suppression of ideas, is that they would always have room for expression. They could always go somewhere else and express their ideas. And so extrapolating this principle, it really seems like we should always vest as much authority and power as locally as possible. So first and foremost, preserve our individuality against the encroaching collectivism, which seems to be increasingly vogue today. And then also ensure that families are well provided for or well protected. Not necessarily provided for, but you know what I mean. And these seem to be the best ways to preserve not only man's equality, but also the flourishing ultimately of society, in which each citizen takes responsibility for the state of themselves, and then also thereby from that society. Like there's a great quote, I think it's from St. Augustine. I might be getting it confused with someone else. Basically, sanctify yourself and you'll sanctify the world, or conquer yourself and the whole world lies at your feet. And the basic idea is that, well, if you want a just society, what is society but the sum of the parts? Then if you wish to have a just society, have just individuals. And so this has kind of been a little bit sporadic, but basically overall it seems that the way forward is the subsidiarity, and also I would say just a gratefulness for all that we have. It seems that prosperity can be pretty antithetical to, sorry, that's not what I mean at all. I don't mean that prosperity can be antithetical to virtue, but that it makes it a lot harder, which is why in the Bible, of course, Christ says, warns us against being rich. Not that being rich is inherently sinful, but that it makes one's reliance on God more difficult to be attained. And so this is why Scipio, St. Augustine writes a lot about this in City of God, about how Scipio, who was a Roman general, warned against the destruction of Carthage in the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars, of course, consisted in 3 wars, which culminated in the ultimate destruction of Carthage in the Third War. Scipio warned against the destruction of Carthage because it would then leave Rome without an enemy that might instill fear in people. And the reason that fear was powerful was because fear was a mitigator against avarice, greed, and dissolution of values, into which you eventually saw Rome fall. That without Carthage, in the absence of Carthage, you saw decadence, moral decline. And so that's something to be wary of. And now, of course, I don't think the answer is to instill fear perpetually or anything like that, because that's an incredibly unsustainable and ultimately, I think, even ethically untenable position. But it does beg the question of what is the right response to unbounded prosperity. Like, here I am, I have an HVAC system, I have heating, I have lighting, I have a computer, I have spices from all around the world. I have access to things that emperors of old couldn't even dream of. So in the face of such unparalleled prosperity, how is it that one can preserve the virtue, which is a necessary condition for the growth and sustainment of a society, of a good society? Very much it seems to me that we are borrowing from the prosperity of our predecessors to be able to do a lot of nonsensical things. That is only because of the superabundance of our blessings received from on old that we're able to dick around, that we're able to just mess with frivolity and with idiocy and irrationality. It really is only because we are built on so high a mountain of blessings that we're able to do this. And so one of my principal concerns and what I hope to figure out in the next year of reading here is really what can we do in the United States to not fight against prosperity. Prosperity, there's nothing wrong with prosperity, but fight against the temptation that accompanies prosperity, to rest on our laurels of sorts, to forget from where we came from. It seems as though gratitude is fundamentally should be the object of our pursuit toward fighting that if we're just humble and thankful for all that we have, then that would really fight against the vices that typically stem from prosperity. So that's it. I don't know, but hopefully we'll find out. So thanks for tuning in.